Woo! Here we go. All right, IB History of the Americas. This is going to be your seat now, and so I will be creating the seating chart based on where you are at. All right. Many of you are familiar faces with the Mass. Some are not. Some are new to me this trimester. So welcome, and perhaps maybe you've heard some stuff from Miss Iden about me or not. Maybe we'll see. Let's see if it's all true. So how's our 3.2 starting? It's okay. It's okay. All right. It's interesting. It seems like, okay, this is like our 6th semester, just flow. Trying to get a flow going here. The class before you, they're seniors, and so I think they're just glad they finally see the finish line there, all that stuff. So there we go. Any good highlights for the weekend I want to share? I know it's our first day together. Maybe we'll share some more and all that stuff. My highlight is successfully, my wife and I, we had purchased a couple kayaks. And so one, I'm not the tallest guy. All right. I'm a little guy. And if Mr. Leonard was here, you'll really see how little I am. But just to visualize this, me putting kayaks on top of a Honda Pilot. All right. Yes, I did have a step stool. All right. I'm okay. I'm confident. That's all right. Step stool. And I love that the entire conversation is Mrs. Newton's like, you sure you know what you're doing? I'm like, that is not what you want to ask me. But yes. But the highlight is successfully getting them up there and getting them home without them falling off. That's bonus. All right. I learned a lot on what I need to fix. So that's my little highlight right there. All right. Well, maybe as the trimester goes and we feel a little bit more comfortable, we can share some good highlights and stuff like that. All right. So with that quickly here, I got to put together a seating chart now that I give you the honor to do that. Now I will go through and create a seating chart, and those at home, welcome on board. All right. So here we go. We'll just let's see. We got True here. All right. Is that Micah? No. Dolan? Nate. Nate. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Micah's at home right now. All right. Okay. All right. So let's see. Let's go through the Ethan right there. I'll cover them up. And man, where's Maddie now? What happened to Maddie? Maddie Briggs. What happened to you? Oh, there you are. Okay. And Anastasia. All right. Anna. Okay. And Evan's there. Okay. Matt right there. All right. Kenzie's right here. All right. Yohan is right there. Okay. Catherine, right there. You want to be Catherine? Kate. All right. Natalia. Right there. Molly's over there. Isabel, right there. All right, I think we're good. I think we're money. All right, so this is where we're at. I gotta put this together, of course, submit it, all that good stuff. All right, so here we go. Just bear with me here for a little bit here. I do I do tend to, as Poseidon will say, oh, you must have talked forever. And so I'll try to avoid talking forever, and give you some time here. But start of a new trimester. And so if you haven't, the getting to know, because some of you are new to me. And so on Schoology page, they have this link here, and I sent it out a couple times. And so if I had you already, there's no need to fill that out unless you want to. But for the new ones, please fill it out. So names, all that stuff. So I get a sense of who you are. And of course, throughout the trimester, I'll get a good sense of who you are as well, hopefully. All right, highlights for this trimester. So we will, 3.2, we will look at our last big unit of study. All right, and so what that means is we will look at the civil rights and social protest movements of the Americas. So because social protest movements in there, yes, we will focus a little bit on the hippies of the 60s, all right? And so this is where I always got to throw a disclaimer, because some of my colleagues will throw out there, I was born in the 60s, but that does not mean I necessarily am a hippie, all right? Just because I was born in the 60s, all that. So we will focus on things like that. But the hippies belong to the counterculture. All right, so that's one aspect of youth protests. So we'll take a look at those elements there. Of course, we'll take a look at the feminist movement and the Latinx movement in there as well. We will start off with the indigenous movements. So that's part of the social protests. And then we have the big civil rights movement, where you can see that all these protest movements, social movements, in some ways are offshoots. Splinters of the civil rights movement, and we'll try to make some modern day connections, because that's what we have. We have some civil rights issues that are occurring, and see if we can make some connection pieces there as well. So that's kind of the whole thing. You do not have to worry about an internal assessment. All right, so I think I made that statement perhaps in 2.1 or in 2.2, and Ms. Seiden probably has well. We don't have to worry about an internal assessment this year. Year 2 of IB history, we'll just have to worry about the internal assessment. We've got to make sure we take care of that piece, and we'll probably do that during the first trimester of next year. Perhaps that's how it'll work out. Okay, so overall, kind of what the unit of study that we're looking at, and that's our third big one that we will address. Any questions with that? If we are thinking about, and again, if you're at home, if you got questions, please put it in the chat, and I will follow it. Okay. The grading, all that stuff is going to be similar, just the same way as it was in the 1.0s and the 2.0s. Same thing, and the 80-20 is what we're looking at. All right, this trimester, though, we might have a few more summative assessments than we've had in the past. I think we are going to end up having about 4 summatives, where I think maybe last time we had 2. So we got a little bit more. So roll up those sleeves here, and we're going to finish strong. All right, questions, comments, concerns with that? All right, so here we go. We are going to, let me take down some of these lights here. We're going to look at indigenous peoples of the Americas first, all right? Look at the indigenous movement. And so I like to talk about historical context in order for us to understand why perhaps this movement might occur, and who are we talking about with it as well. And so when we talk about indigenous people, in my day, we simply would have referred to them as American Indians, Native Americans, but realistically, indigenous peoples is what we're going to try to be consistent with as well. With that, though, you might remember from world history studying, with the Columbian expedition. So prior to Christopher Columbus coming to the Americas, you know, the demographers, you know, they're thinking about 112 million people in the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, were indigenous people. Today, as of 2020, not 2021, but as 2020, you can see Latin America has about 45 million indigenous people, with Mexico having 25. But you can see that Bolivia probably has the largest population when we break it down demographically. In Canada, you're looking at about 1.7, and in the United States, about 4.5 million. In the great state of Minnesota, we're looking at about 58,000, right? 58,000, right? That make up indigenous people. All right. The thing, though, is when we look at indigenous people, it would not be fair to lump them all together because they are very different cultural groups. And so in the United States now we're going to kind of break it down even further. As of 2020, there are about 574 tribes recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Now, there are a number of them that are not recognized, and that might be because of some policies that were created or groups coming together, trying to reestablish themselves and then hopefully get federal recognition. So about 574 tribes. And these tribes can come from the same cultural group, one could say, right? And so in Minnesota, we have 11 tribes that are recognized. And some of you might have gone on and driven through some of their communities, all right? And so like in Minnesota, we have two large groups known as the Dakota and the Ojibwa. If we lived in Wisconsin, we might call the Ojibwa Chippewa. The Ojibwa sometimes might be called Anishinaabe people. All right, so Minnesota, we have the Lower Sioux, we have the Upper Sioux, we have the Prairie Island, and we have Shakopee, Mende-Waukton. All right, so those are the four communities or reservations. All right, Minnesota, we tend to refer to them as communities, but they really are reservations. That might be a holdover because of the 1862 uprising that had occurred in Minnesota during the great U.S. Civil War time. All right, and so I do have a connection piece to that 1862 uprising. And then Ojibwa, there are 7 recognized Ojibwa tribes, or reservations: Red Lake, White Earth, Boise Fort, Fond du Lac, Grand Portage, and Mille Lacs Lake. All right, so those are the 11. Now that doesn't mean we don't have others, because we do. Minneapolis has a large indigenous population, the Heart of Earth community as they refer to it as. There is a large indigenous population there from people around the United States. And again, they're there, again, maybe because of some policies that have been put in place at the end of the 19th century into the 20th century. And through our activity, we'll learn some of that. And in southern Minnesota, you might find some people that are known as Menominee or Winnebago. All right, sounds like a town and sounds like an RV. All right, but that just makes reference to groups that might have been moved from another region to Minnesota. All right, so we got that there. Ojibwa really are not native to Minnesota. They have migrated into Minnesota and pushed the Dakota out on to the plains and into the southern part of the state. All right, so there we go. We have a little bit of who they are, kind of context. Any questions on that? So let's see here. Now I said I have a connection here, all right, to the 1862 Dakota uprising. All right, let's skip that. I want to skip that for a moment. There we go. I just didn't find some random picture on the internet and threw it in there and said, well, let's talk about this. I think sometimes it's important to know who stands in front of you. I am Mr. Newcomb, All right. But do you know anything about who I am? I've been at Park High for a little while. Let's see, 1992 is when my experience at Park High begins. All right, I student taught here at Park High, and then I got hired in 1993. And besides teaching, I also had the pleasure of being a soccer coach for many years as well, for about 27 years. I've been a soccer coach, and I also dabbled with baseball. All right, so I've been a baseball coach too, ninth grade level for about 5 years. I have done that. So that, and I'm also from the community, maybe not from the CG, but I'm from Newport. All right, so I am in the surrounding community. So, so I am a product of South Washington County here, 833. My family, we moved from St. Paul to Newport, and I've always asked my dad, you know, why did we move from St. Paul to Newport? And his response was, well, because we had relatives that lived in Newport, and that there was other indigenous families that lived in Newport. And this area sometimes was called Red Rock, which was a very important spot for the Dakota people. And South St. Paul. Does anyone know what the other name for South St. Paul is? There's a Dakota name for it. And every year, South St. Paul has these days. I don't know if anyone adventures into South St. Paul. What do we got here? Oh, I think someone raised their hand. Okay, Gavin, what do you got?
Isn't there something with South St. Paul like Kaposia or something like that?
Yes. South St. Paul used to be called Kaposia as well, and so that has some strong indigenous roots there as well. Now, I said it's important to kind of know a little bit who I am, so I gave you a little bit of that bio, but then I also just dropped some reference of indigenous as well. You know, our family trees, you know, we all have family trees, and we know our type of trees that we have, or how many branches are on it and all that stuff, you know. And if if I go in this direction, on my mom's side, they're German. They're 100% German, you know. There's different flavors of German. All right, Swiss, Austrian, and from Germany itself, but they're all German. And ever going to my mom's family, later side of the family reunion, you better know a little bit of German, because my mom is a second generation, and they're German being said at the family reunion. So I can sprechen Sie Deutsch a little bit. I can speak a little German. All right, and sometimes I drop the German in here. I go, ach, ihr Liebe, was ist Ihr Problem? You know, I'll throw that out there. But then if I go on my dad's side of the family, that's where it gets very interesting, in that both sides are very interesting, but that's the indigenous side. My indigenous story begins in the 1850s, because of great-great-grandpa Peter Felix came from Canada and marries an indigenous woman. All right, and he does that because he is a farmer, but he's also a fur trapper. All right, and so by doing that, he's got a connection to a local tribe, and he did that in Mendota, or as they would say, Bedote. All right, and so that is where my indigenous story begins. His son, which would be my great-great-grandpa, is the connection with the 1862 uprising. In southern Minnesota, the Dakota rose up against the United States for a variety of reasons. Maybe they looked at it, it's a perfect time to do that because the United States is fighting a civil war, or to try to address some problems and stuff. So my great-great-grandpa joins the Minnesota 6th Regiment, and he's got to go down and fight. Right? So I'm a little bit of this history. As a result of that war, all Dakota and Minnesota are shipped out of the state. They're thrown in exile. Those that live here have to live secretly because there's a bounty placed out on their heads. So if you killed a Dakota person after 1862, you could get some money from the state of Minnesota. They were shipped out to Nabora, Nebraska, and a new reservation was created called the Santee Reservation. That is where my grandmother now, all right, so great-great-grandpa, Peter Felix, fought for the United States, helped put down the uprising, fought against Johnny Reb, but after that war, got shipped to Nabora, Nebraska, on a new reservation that's created. Now, how do they get back here to Minnesota? Eventually, by 1870, great-great-grandpa, Peter Felix, his son, decides to move back to Minnesota because it's gotten safer. So now these places like Lower Sioux, Upper Sioux, Shakopee, and Prairie Island all are reforming. So they are much smaller. So Gavin, that's the answer to your question. They're much smaller than they used to be. And Peter Felix now comes back home, but he doesn't come back to Mendota yet. He goes to Morton, Redwood Falls, which is the Lower Sioux area. And that's where my grandmother is. And that's her right here. That's Grandma. All right. That's the little one there. She's probably about 3 years old in that picture. But I guess my question to you is, do they look indigenous? Would they fit the image of being indigenous? If you look at that photo. And based on what you might know. Do they have the long hair and traditional garments? Maybe Ellen does. She's got long hair. The boys definitely don't, right? They have, the type of haircut my dad always would prefer his boys to have. He's like, you can have any kind of haircut you want in the house as long as it's crew cut. It's like, great. All right. You got to have that. And he's like, but you can have flat top if you want. We're like, no, come on, Dad, no. So that was a little bit harder for him to control once we got a little bit older. And he's like, okay, we'll let the hair flow and all that stuff. And Miss Iden always had asked, how long did you leave your hair actually grow? I said, well, it didn't quite get down to my shoulders, but, it grew a little bit longer. They don't look like that because one thing is when they were down in the Lower Sioux area, all right, sorry, and this is going to be a connection piece to also the activity that we do. In the Lower Sioux area, they went to reservation schools, but then they also went to boarding schools. And boarding schools basically was part of the Americanization process. The old saying was, kill the Indian, save the man. And so these young men here, they're going to get their hairs cut, they're going to put on the clothes, and they're going to be taught a vocational trade. Maybe be a farmer, maybe be a mechanic, whatever it is. And the young women, they're going to learn about how to be good homemakers and domestic skills and all that stuff. But they're not going to be able to practice their language. So my grandmother, even though she was born in Paxton Township, which is near Morton and in Redwood Falls, she is an enrolled member. She was an enrolled member of the Nabora, Nebraska. Any Dakota living on that reservation, they were considered friendly Indians who did not rise up against the government in the 1862 uprising, or perhaps helped the government. Gavin, got a question, buddy?
Where is that place in Nebraska that you're talking about?
Yes, that is on the, it's right there on the border of South Dakota and Nebraska near Pine Ridge. I guess, if we want to, not too far from the community that's kind of known as Walled Rug in South Dakota. So it's out there. It's on the middle of nowhere, you know. I guess, which was a designed reason for that. There was a design reason for it. But one thing is, my grandmother, because of boarding schools and her experience there, I could not sit down and have a conversation with her about her Indigenous history. It was not a positive one. So a lot of the learning would have to be talked about with some of these others and their siblings, or their kids, to learn about our Indigenous. Grandma was an enrolled member, but again, because of her experience at the boarding schools, she did not want her kids to go through that experience, so she did not enroll them. So I got the status of being what we call a lineal descendant, and I will not be able to enroll at Naboro, Nebraska, even if I try to. But there's possibilities maybe at some other places with it. So the point of the story and all that stuff is, again, I can philosophize. In history, we find our place. We try to find our place where it fits and begins. Many of us in here, maybe our story begins at the end of the 19th century because of our immigrant past and our relatives maybe coming then. Or maybe it happens in the 20th or the 21st century, depending on when that story begins and how involved. You know, during the Second World War, I made reference to, and you may remember, but I made reference to, it was that moment that on my mom's side of the family, her grandparents, so my great-grandparents, became naturalized citizens. It was, again, because of the climate, perhaps, being German, they want to prove their loyalty. So we find these moments in history that we find our connection piece, and it becomes a little bit more. So when we get to Indigenous movement, you know, I get a little bit more personally checked in because it's part of my story. And when we talk about why people are living where they are and what influences their living and the outcomes of some of these policies, you know, it becomes a little bit more real. And so for me, it becomes a little bit more real because I can see it. All right. So when we look at the Indigenous movement, we want to look at, in the case of the Felixes here, their last name is Felix, what is the history that's leading up to it? And what events are impacting them as perhaps maybe addressing some big concerns about government and Indigenous people, or society, Indigenous people, and then what kind of outcomes come from these events and laws and legislation pieces. All right. Now, I did have a video clip, but I'm gonna pass on that video clip maybe tomorrow. I'll show that piece. I'll do that. What I want you to do actually is, let's go to Schoology here. Let's just dig into our activity that we are go with here. But I do have one video clip that I will anoint. So let's go here to Indigenous activities. So I had opened it up, and you can work with a historical buddy on it, but those in here, we got to make sure that we're doing social distancing. All right, social distance. That means we can't really be moving around here. We're going to have to. So hopefully your buddy is right next to you. All right, or definitely you can do this solo. So it's going to look like this. All right, it's going to look like this. And what we want to look at is the Indigenous movement that happens, that's going to pop up in the 50s and the 60s, or post-World War II is what we're looking at, up to modern time. But to understand that, we got to get that historical context. Just like for me, I got to get my historical context to understand why Grandma ended the way she did. And eventually she did get back to the Dote, Mendota, Minnesota. But I had to get some historical context with it. So there's lots of layers here. All right. And so as I had stated, the indigenous people of the Americas are the inhabitants of the Americas before the arrival of European settlers. It was Christopher Columbus that called them Indians. And ethnic groups who now identify themselves with those people. Over time, the relationships become a little strained, as we find out, a lot strained throughout the Americas. And the indigenous people have experienced changes to their way of life, all right, politically, economically, and socially. And so during the Civil Rights Movement, various indigenous groups sought to revigorate cultural heritage. When we got here, I had the symbol of the American Indian Movement, AIM, that was formed in Minneapolis in the 1960s on Franklin Avenue, which is going to bring on some of these civil rights-like issues. All right, so you may work with a historical buddy or solo. So that's first thing you got to decide. Second thing you got to decide, there are 3 indigenous movements in the Americas. You must choose one of them, all right? Maybe you want to focus on Latin America. You can do that. Or focus on the Native American movements or the indigenous movements in the United States, which we tend to be a little bit more familiar with, or the First Peoples movement in Canada. All right, so those are our 3 broad movements here. All right, you focus on one of them. And I did have some attachments to this assignment that can help you find resources with them, with any of these. All right, there might be a little bit more for, of course, those in the United States. All right, so you got to pick, are you going to go solo or with a person? You got to figure out your movement, and then you got to decide, you know, how hard are you going to work? How hard are you going to work? All right, options to receive an A, graphic novel, winter count, Dakota, and I'll explain a little bit more about that one there. And there's a big description of it on the next page. Newscast. All right, so we got to hear your voice or voices, and should be at least 7 minutes. Visuals, of course. Any of these, graphic novels, winter count, newscasts, all got to have some visuals. Same with if you go with the Google Slides PowerPoint, Adobe Spark. All right, you can technically add sound to a Google slide. All right, and if you did that, then that could bump you into that A range. But again, you must need to have some visuals in there as well. And then, of course, you got the timeline. Just a timeline showing change over time. That's the big thing, change over time. You want to make sure that you pay attention to the descriptions that go with each of these. All right. And then whichever you choose, though, you need to address these things. First one, situation of the indigenous people before 1945. That gives us that historical context. So we got to get an understanding about perhaps what we call the historical discrimination or problems, the inequities that might exist. All right. Then you got to look at the indigenous activism increased after 1945. So this is kind of like the civil rights movement pieces. All right. So who are the leaders? Who are the organizations that are contributing to this activism? If we were studying the civil rights movement in terms of for African Americans, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., CORE, SNCC, all that stuff. Here with indigenous people, are there individuals like that? And you will find, yes, there is. And events, key events that show perhaps desires for change, or it could be conflict as well. Pine Ridge Uprising, the taking over of Alcatraz Island, taking over the BIA, termination policy, Indian boarding schools, whatever it is. All right, all these things fit in there. Okay, and then the government response to activism. All right, as a result of it, was there some change? So that's where we talk about legislation or programs. Was land given back? Was education programs, health services created? Or nothing? All right, so those are the things you want to make sure you take into consideration. Got some resources here as well. You can look at that. Then, of course, like I said, attached on here as well are some handouts. This one right here is a nice little web resources that Media Center put together. Right? Woo! And we always got to have a BHQ in there. Always got to have a BHQ, big historical question. Got to have one. All right? And so how and to what extent did Indigenous peoples in Canada, Latin America, or United States achieve equality? And again, it's like a how and to what extent. That's nice and gray. So lots of interpretations there. Lots of interpretations. 20 righteous points here. It's a summative right out of the gate due Friday. And I would say that's kind of a soft one because, you know, we're going into the weekend. But we want you to get used to deadline. And so today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and Thursday and Friday are going to be asynchronous. Well, Friday is a live Google Meet, excuse me. But Thursday is an asynchronous day because you got NCAs and all that good stuff to go with it. Now, winter count. I want to highlight the winter count because the winter count is not like a traditional timeline. It's a visual. It's a visual. It's like you can see down here. All right. If you ever been to like the History Center or the Minneapolis Institute of Art, MIA, they had some winter count on display. It's a visual. One could say visual of events that happened over time. All right, so it's similar to a timeline, but not quite like a timeline that we create over a linear line. All right, here, let me give you a little highlight that here. All right, very simple video, but I think it hits home what it means to be a winter count. That might be an option here. So let's watch this little video clip. Let me mute my.
Hello, my name is Ben. At school, my class is learning about winter counts. They are very interesting. They kind of remind me of my history book back at school. My history book has stories written about things that happened a long time ago, in the past. Like a history book or timeline, a winter count tells a history. It is the history of a family group called the Teoshpaye. The Teoshpaye were family groups who were part of a larger group called the Ocheti Shakowin that lived in an area called the Midwest. The lone dog winter count is one of my favorite because it is drawn on a buffalo hide. Others were also drawn on buffalo hides or other types of hides or ledger paper. Each year at the beginning of winter, members of the Teoshpaye would select the most important thing that happened since the last winter. Then a special member of the Teoshpaye called the keeper of the winter count would draw a picture of the event. Each picture on a winter count represents a special event that took place in the past. The keeper of the winter count was also the oral historian. My teacher said the keeper also had the job of telling the story or history of each picture drawn on the count. The Ocheti Shakowin did not write things down on paper. They had an oral tradition in which the history was passed from generation to generation by telling stories. One of my favorite pictures on Lone Dog's winter count took place in 1833. There was a very large meteor shower in which it looked like the stars were falling out of the sky. That is so cool. My teacher had us complete a special project to help us remember winter counts. It was kind of like a winter count, but it was different. We had to draw pictures of 3 special events that took place the last year. One event was to be selected by a grandparent, one by a parent, and one by me. I was surprised at how hard it was to select one event for the year. I can't imagine how hard it would be to select one event for an entire group. To start, we cut out a large piece of construction paper into the shape of a hide. Then we all had to draw our own picture. My grandpa drew a picture of my grandmother because they had their 40th anniversary. My grandma is so nice. My mom drew a picture of my baby sister who was born this year. I drew a picture of my dad who was very sick. He is better now. I love the way it turned out. With the help of a grown-up, you should try this fun activity.
You're muted.
All right. Any of that can be done on paper, and I got paper in the back, and I got all the supplies and all that stuff can go with it as well. Newscast, no. We need to hear your voice on that piece there, and Google Slides and all that stuff, of course. No, you're not doing that piece on paper as well. So if you are doing a winter count and you're at home, do it on paper and then just take a picture of it and then submit it that way. Same with your graphic novels. If you do it on paper, take pictures of it, submit it. Timeline, same thing. Okay? So that's what we got. All right. Is there any questions? All right. Actually, I'll go back to the winter count here. Again, since it's visuals, but some of them also had like numbers by them. And so that's what you're going to want. You're going to want to do as well is you do a visual, you have visuals, and it's not a hot mess. The visuals, that would be a collage. Put a number by it, and then in a different spot, the name of the event and an annotation that goes with it. So if I was doing a winter count, I would say, you know, some of my highlights for the year: 1990, graduating from the University of Minnesota, being the first in the Newcomb family, graduating from college. That would be big. 2020, yeah, it's the pandemic, but I would probably in my winter count, I'd probably I stepped away from coaching soccer for 27 years. So I'd probably have like an image of a soccer ball on it and a net for that. If I was doing my graduation, I'd probably have my diploma and a hat, and you can have multiple images. All right. If you are working with a historical buddy can also be one that's at home. You can be a buddy with a VLA as well. Okay. All right. Just throwing a lot out there. You have any questions? Those at home, if you got questions, let me know. Put in the chat or on mute. All right. So with that, let's see, we get out, I forget what time we get out. 15. We got 30 minutes? Holy cow. Sorry. I'll say it in German. Tut hat ein Muttermund. I have a motor mouth here. I talk too much. All right. You got 30 minutes to get a good start. Tomorrow you'll have a lot more time to get a good head start here. Those at home, got questions, ask or exit and have a fabulous Tuesday. Those here, let's roll up our sleeves and let's dig in. Let's go.